Hi, everybody. Boy, well, the voters have spoken. The overwhelming majority of our country has chosen Joe Biden and Kamala Harris with a total margin of 4 million and growing. I mean, it's not totally official yet, but Pennsylvania has already begun calling for there's news outlets that have already become I don't know about you, but I'm verklempt. I mean, have you slept? Have you felt nauseous? I'm barely recovered now. I mean, we were warned not to fall for the red mirage on election night, but to, breathe deep and be patient. And we all knew that. I mean, I knew that, but in my head, but living through it, it's another thing, right? I mean, I was so rocked by flashbacks to 2016, weren't you? So anyway, now we can relax. Let's do that a little bit. Relax our shoulders, take a few deep breaths. Do it with me. Close your eyes. Inhale and exhale. Relax your shoulders. Inhale. Exhale. Open your eyes. Joe Biden has broken all records for most votes ever cast for a US presidential candidate, more than 72 million and counting. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to African Americans, especially Black women. Stacey Abrams should be crowned world's most righteous sister, right? Her organizing has helped lead to a runoff for 2 Senate seats in Georgia, which could potentially mean that Dems take back control of the Senate, and there's no overstating how important that would be. I want to thank all of you Fire Drill Friday Greenpeace volunteers. They touched 4 million climate voters in swing states who sat out the last election. Good work, all of you. And there's plenty of other good news. I'm going to do this again. AOC and the squad all win re-election to Congress. Sarah McBride has become the first openly transgender state senator in Delaware. Mississippi voted to replace their state flag that displayed the Confederate flag. Big breath. When we needed to plan today, this Fire Drill Friday, we didn't know how the election was going to turn out, but we knew we needed guests who could hold the space, however it was going to go, and guests who knew about hope and healing and inspiration. It took about 1 minute to know who our first choices were, and guess what? That's who we have here today. We have Rebecca Solnit, a most inspired writer and thought leader who has much to say about hope in dark times. She grew up in Northern California and attended San Francisco State University, got her master's degree in journalism from the University of California, Berkeley. Rebecca is a much awarded author of 17 books, as well as numerous essays. She received 2 NEA fellowships for literature, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Creative Capital Award, a Lenin Literary Fellowship, and a 2004 Wired rave review for writing on the effects of technology on the arts and humanities. In 2010, the Utne Reader magazine named Solnit as one of the 25 visionaries who are changing your world. Her Far Away Nearby was nominated for a National Book Award. I mean, I could continue reading all her book awards, but it would take longer than you would imagine. Suffice to say that if you haven't read her books, now's the time. In addition to her writing, though, Rebecca is an activist who has worked on environmental and human rights campaigns since the 1980s, notably with the Western Shoshone Defense Project in the early 1990s, and with anti-war activists throughout the Bush era. She's written about climate change and has worked with 350.org and the Sierra Club, and in women's rights, especially violence against women. So glad you're here, Rebecca. And we have the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, President and Senior Lecturer of Repairers of the Breach, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, Bishop with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, visiting professor at Union Theological Seminary, pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and author of 4 books. In 2018, Dr. Barber, Reverend Dr. Barber, helped launch the Poor People's Campaign, which was begun by Reverend Martin Luther King in 1968, starting with a historic wave of protests in state capitals and in Washington, D.C., calling for a moral agenda and a moral budget to address the 5 interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, the war economy and ecological devastation, and the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Reverend Barber, will you start us off and help ground us with a prayer?
Thank you so much, Jane. And after being asked that just yesterday, I found my spirit going to St. Francis of Assisi. And I want to pray that prayer in this moment, and then one other thing attached to it. He prayed, and I think we ought to pray. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. And oh Lord, as you have given us another measure of grace in this moment and through this election, and an opportunity to mend our flaws as a nation, help us to grab it, help us to celebrate it, help us to use it, help us not to back away from it. And with this new election and new people, help us to be clear about lifting the poor and the least of these, knowing, oh God, that the hope is in the morning from the pain. But if we address the mourning and the pain, by addressing the mourning and the pain, we will inspire even more hope and more courage and more truth and more love, and most of all, more life. Grant us the courage for the facing of this hour. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Barber. Let me start my first question with you, Rebecca. You've cited restorative justice activist Mariame Kaba as famously saying, "Hope isn't an emotion. Hope is not optimism. Hope is discipline." I love that. And you've said that hope is a commitment to the future that must manifest as action. And God knows we need right now, with a country as divided as this, we need hope. Will you talk to us more about hope and why we need to cultivate that discipline right now?
Yeah, one thing I always think is useful to do is to clarify, hope is not optimism. Optimism thinks everything's going to be fine and we don't have to do anything. It lets you off the hook. And it's actually the twin of pessimism, which says everything's going to hell and there's nothing we can do about it, and also lets us off the hook. Hope says we don't know what's going to happen, because what happens is partly dependent on what we do. We're making the future in the present. The future is not yet written. And so one of the things that's so hard with hope, I think, for all of us, and these last few days have been such an intense version, is you have to stick with the fact that we live in profound uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen next. It might be terrible. It might be wonderful. I'm sitting in front of my favorite piece of art. It's a black swan by a developmentally disabled artist, Celine Perez. But black swans are those significant, unanticipated things that change the course of things. And history is full of black swans, things we don't know are going to happen, things that suddenly erupt, things that turn the tide. And often it turns out that they have been building for a long time, but you don't know when an Occupy Wall Street will suddenly happen, when, you know, Eastern European activists will topple their regimes, when the pressure will let Nelson Mandela out of prison and end apartheid in South Africa, when Black Lives Matter achieved some kind of critical mass this summer that really changed the conversation around policing and justice. And so uncertainty and hope are inseparable. Hope is the icing on the cake we all want to eat, but uncertainty is kind of the cake we have to learn to digest. And that's certainly work we've all been doing so intensely these last few days as we wait for a definitive outcome.
With so much terrible news that we've had over the last many months, what keeps you hopeful, Rebecca?
One of the things that does is longer arcs. The news cycle is what happened yesterday and today. It's electoral politics, which is the most dismal part of our politics. And so part of it is the long arc, which, you know, Martin Luther King says bends towards justice, seeing not what has happened to women this week, but in my lifetime, which is almost 60 years now, the transformation of the status of women, and you've lived through all this, you know, is so profound. And I was born when to be gay or lesbian or queer or trans was to be treated as either mentally ill or criminal or both. To see those long revolutions, I'm a little bit older than Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and thus a little bit older than a real environmental movement, and really naming the systemic interconnectedness and vulnerability of the systems that sustain us. Seeing those long changes, watching those things, but also what sustains me is the beautiful souls and incredible heroes around us, seeing the Sunrise Movement, Black Lives Matter, the indigenous movements energized by Standing Rock that are still doing remarkable things, seeing so many, you know, and the joy of activism, which is often treated as the broccoli you're supposed to eat, but is sweeter than anything else I know, is the best people in the world, and the chance to be with people who are visionary, who are generous, who are hopeful, who are committed, who don't need life to be easy and are there to do the hard work. And then, you know, and part of what the long perspective also gives us is memory that we don't always win, but when we show up and do the work, sometimes we win. And those victories in the past can help us look forward to the uncertainty of the future and keep trying.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Reverend Barber, what impression have the last 3 days given you? What do you think next week will bring?
Well, Jane, you know, I was thinking, even as Rebecca was talking about this powerful scripture, Romans 5, and it says something, it says, not only so, but we glory in our suffering, because we know suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Spirit. You know, when I look at what we're seeing in this election, there's been a lot of suffering to get us here, a lot of pain, a lot of perseverance, a lot of discipline. You know, when you see North Carolina, 2 southern states, and Georgia as close as they are, that didn't just happen. I mean, in North Carolina, it was 1,200 of us that got arrested, and 5 years of work in Moral Monday, and death threats, and organizing, and when Stacey, registering people and being called a fool and being told the South can't change because people had believed the illusion that was created in '68 with Nixon and Kevin Phillips and Buchanan. But they keep working. And now to see Southern states, even the ones we may not win this election, but the closeness is the sign, that the South and the Sun Belt, there's a new rising and a new coming together in moral fusion politics. And it's possible to organize Black and white and brown and indigenous people all over the South. That's huge for where we are. But I also think when I was talking to someone, Jane, yesterday, and I think about where we are. We have for president, we got a white man and a black woman who has roots in India, where Gandhi came from. They dared to run, maybe not everything we want, but run on 15 and a union, expanding healthcare and dealing with systemic racism openly. In the midst of COVID, they get the largest vote total in history. And we're not even through. Even though it's the largest, there's still 30, 40, 50 million more people. They have, they're winning a state in the South, in the deep South, right? And the district that John Lewis represented is delivering the last votes to push over the top. And we also just found out this morning that the census reports are showing, a census tract, that poor and low wealth people actually voted for progressive more than they voted for Trump, which a lot of people don't know. I'm talking about white and Black. Black and Latino people are critical to what happened in Nevada, what's happening in Philadelphia. And this is after the worst voter suppression and misinformation we've seen since Jim Crow. And since 2010, 26 states have passed proven racist voter suppression. So it's almost like the extremists threw everything they had, everything they had. And the country said, no, it's going to be over 270 votes. It's going to be more than 4 million votes. And we're going to end up having to come back right during the time we're celebrating the Martin Luther King holiday to have a Senate vote from his state, his birth state, where two people, an African-American and a white brother, will be running to possibly change the makeup of the Senate. I mean, you have to sit in that for a moment, right? Yeah. And you can't just run through that and go to the next problem. I heard people today talking about, well, Joe Biden and them need to be more centrist. No. Hold up. Just stop for a minute. And then somebody said, well, they don't have a mandate. Wait a minute. Yes, they do. 4 or 5 million votes winning, and the Electoral College. Trump got 80,000, only had the Electoral College, did not win the popular vote, and they treated it like a mandate. Your mandate is 270. There's nowhere in the Constitution where it said you have to have 280 to have a mandate, or 300. It says 270. You get the presidency and the power of it. So let's stay in that for a moment and see what has been done and the power of the people. Did you see those lines? I mean, people literally risked their lives. I mean, let's stop at that for a minute. They didn't know who they were standing in front of. They didn't know if they had COVID or didn't have COVID, but people put on those masks, put some water in their bag, put a sandwich. I saw people with folding chairs. I went to one place and they were line dancing while they were standing in an unnecessary 6-hour line. They just said, you can do what you want to. You can come watch us. You can try to intimidate us. We're voting. And we need to stay in that for a moment and hear that deep in our spirit. Because before we talk about how divided the country is, because the country has always been divided to a certain extent, we need to talk about how determined the country is. So certain parts of the country continues to be, and it's a sign, I believe, of more to come, not less, but more.
Amen. You know, the Reverend has just described these great events, various uprisings that have occurred. And you have written, Rebecca, about how great public events like uprisings are not, quote, not planting, but the harvest of a change in public imagination. And the metaphor you use, which I love, are mushrooms. You say, quote, mushrooms that spring up after rain are only the fruiting body of a larger underground fungus that we do not see. The rain causes the mushrooms to rise out of the earth, but the fungus was alive and well and invisible beforehand, unquote. You say rain was the event. Talk more about that in relation to what we're living through.
Yeah, I think that there's a false dichotomy between incremental and sudden events, and a lot of radicals tend to poo-poo incrementalism, but a lot of what incrementalism is laying the groundwork, building the foundation for, recruiting to the movement, making the case. And, so much of my hope also comes from watching how ideas move from the shadows and edges and the margins towards the center. There's a famous quote that Gandhi didn't actually say, but that's so relevant here. I haven't been able to find out who really made it up, but it's like, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And so ideas about marriage equality or a full transition away from fossil fuels, the end of fracking, a Green New Deal, move in from the margins. And there will be, like the Green New Deal, there might be a sudden moment when it passes in Congress and is signed into law. But that's because of, and so we often see these things from outside. It seems like something suddenly happens. When you're standing on the surface of the earth, it looks like mushrooms came out of nowhere. When you're deep in it, you see that this is just the culmination of a process that was going on all along. And so I think part of it, and this is exactly Georgia, it's easy to say, oh, Georgia suddenly turned blue, which it appears to be doing. But you got to look at the work being done by people like Reverend Barber, by Stacey Abrams, by all the people fighting for voting rights against the voter suppression, by all the organizers. Everything sudden has a slow history behind it. And so incrementalism and revolution are often completely false dichotomies. And I think incrementalism is what we call slow revolution often, and that we're living through so many slow revolutions over the past 50 years in how we think and understand the world, from a world of isolation and alienation to a world that recognizes the profound interconnectedness ecologically, that climate change is the last part of the story we need to understand on. But that's also social, emotional, economic, and every other form of interconnectedness, and the way that things move through systems. So.
Indeed.
This point of view that you've described, there's the underneath what we can't see, and then what appears like a sudden change, but really is the result of what has been going on out of sight. It's so helpful for organizers and activists and for people in our audience who will be part of the fight going forward to know that it may seem discouraging and nothing may seem to be happening, but we have to keep up the work, because that builds the loam that suddenly things can grow from. What does the past want to tell us about the future, Rebecca? Why is hope inseparable from memory?
I row a boat, and you row looking backwards, and there's this tradition where you kind of fix your gaze on something on shore to kind of stabilize yourself. We can't look forward and know what's going to happen, but we can look backward and learn from the patterns. We can see how movement succeeded in the past. We can see patterns. We can see what moves people to become involved. We can look at Erica Chenoweth's work that shows that it only takes 3.5% of a population to non-violently change a regime. We can look at so many of these transformations and growths. And I think a lot of American pessimism not only comes from the sense that the future is already written, which it's not, but also from a kind of amnesia that doesn't learn from the past, or that only learns the official version, which is like we can look at something like marriage equality. It's very easy and often said, like, the Supreme Court gave people this right. And it's like, no, there's this long incremental process, millions of people courageously coming out of the closet, living their lives, millions of, lots of groundwork. And the Supreme Court is not where it begins, it's where it ends. Electoral politics too are often where something ends by the time we're voting on it or a politician is advocating. So you learn how change works, you learn our victories, you learn how movements grow, you learn what motivates people, you learn that change also is not predictable. Something can happen very suddenly. Small groups can have incredible power. And, my adult life has been so full of, the collapse of the Eastern European regimes in 1989, the Zapatista uprising in 1994, the essentially overthrow of the WTO in 1999, of, the rise of Black Lives Matter, of the way Standing Rock began with a few Standing Rock Lakota doing some organizing and outreach, and ended up really transforming the pipeline debate, the climate debate, building alliances between Indigenous and and environmental and climate movements, but also much less direct things. One of the things that I love, and I won't go on forever, but this is like my favorite thing in recent history. Standing Rock is what convinced Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that she could and she should run for office. Now she is a black swan. Whoever thought this young woman of color could defeat a powerful, longtime white male, congressman, even she was shocked when she won in that amazing event in 2018. So also, and that's another piece of hope. When you look at an event, you can look at it in a very direct way. We asked them to do this and they didn't do it, so we lost. But you can look at it in other ways. And like, yeah, the Dakota Access Pipeline was built, but the court struggle goes on. I was lucky enough to spend some time with John Edwards, a Standing Rock organizer, who was instrumental there and is working on pandemic relief on his reservation. And he told me Standing Rock has also made so many young people on that reservation hopeful and have a sense of their power they didn't have before. So another thing we always need to take into account is that there's the quantifiable, and we can quantify it, and it doesn't always look good, but there's also unquantifiable and indirect consequences, and they matter too, and that's AOC, that's young people who feel different about themselves and their future on and off the reservation. That's national public education about native land rights and pipelines, and so much more.
Yeah, thanks. Reverend Barber, how do we heal from this partisan divide so that we can move forward and address the huge and urgent challenges like injustice and the climate crisis?
And poverty and racism and the war economy. I think Rebecca just said something I want to, because it's a part of the answer. We've too often romanticized the movements of the past. Selma actually started in 1927, organizing of the Dallas County Voters League. And before John Lewis and any of them ever got there, Amelia Boynton, whose nephew actually works for me now, who was beat up on the bridge, was the reason why John Lewis got hit, because he was covering her. But they had been organizing. Some people forget that Diane Nash and Belleville didn't go to the March on Washington. Instead, they stayed away from the March on Washington and went to Selma and started in '63. We forget it was Jimmy Lee Jackson's death that first spawned the idea. And so sometimes, even in the way we remember as revolutionaries, as liberationists, we have to be careful not to get sucked in to the romantic piece. So how do we heal? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that we are not going to heal all the divisions. That's just not this democracy, never has been. And those who want to do justice and righteousness have to, when they have the power, do justice and righteousness. You're not going to ever bring everybody along. And if you engage in a false understanding where unity becomes the unity or the perceived unity or genteel violence becomes the goal, then you actually end up having what we had prior to Trump. As I tell folks, Trump did not create all of this division. He simply exploited what was already there. And I don't want to go back to normal. And people didn't vote for normal, because normal before COVID was 140 million poor and low wealth people and 700 people dying a day from poverty and low wealth. So how do you heal the nation? Well, from my perspective, how did the civil rights movement heal the nation enough to get the Voting Rights Act? They had to push for it. They had to stand up and offer another way and demand it. How do you heal? In my faith tradition, healing for a nation is rooted in caring for the least of these. And so when we hear people saying, I think Biden has said, we're battling for the soul of America. But I've cautioned them to say, make sure that when you say you're battling from the soul of America, you don't engage in political Gnosticism. And what political Gnosticism, like Greek Gnosticism and Christian Gnosticism of the first century, is when you separate soul and body. And somehow you feel like there's a feel-good place over here that you can be healed, but you don't have to do the dirty hard work over here of fixing the body. So the body is sick. So I'm preaching a sermon in 2 weeks, the necessary division for unity. Jesus once, the necessary division for unity. Jesus once said, I come to bring a sword. Now, what was he talking about? He said, I come to separate mama from children. What was he talking about? What he was talking about was a surgeon in an operating room cannot have unity with bacteria if the patient's gonna be healed. So there's a sense in which you can't say unity at all costs. How do you heal America? You must heal the body. Healing the body will bring unity. What do I mean by that? 62% of people right now want a living wage. They want a higher wage. Pass that policy, it'll bring unity. People all over, the majority of people in this country want health care because they're sick. And in the midst of COVID, they're scared. Do that. The majority of people that we call essential workers need paid sick leave and unemployment. Fight for that. Heal the body. Now, you know, Sister Fonda, I'm calling you like South, say Sister Fonda. I know it's Jane, I'm just teasing you. So, you know, I'm a preacher on the South. If I guarantee you, if you stump your toe real bad, it affects your soul, it affects your mind. And if you want your mind to calm down, you got to put something on that toe. What we have to recognize is that the body is sick. Too much poverty in the wealthiest nation, too much sickness, too much fear, too much racism. Want to heal the soul of the nation, heal the body. Now let me put this in constitutional terms. If you read our Constitution, it is interesting to me. It is very interesting to me, Rebecca, and Rebecca can help me with this, that it does not say that ensuring domestic tranquility is the first goal in our moral frame. It's not what it said. It's not even the first goal for we the people to come together. That's not it. The first goal for we the people is to establish justice, and then to provide for the common defense, and then to promote the general welfare. And it's almost as though what it's saying, even if the founders didn't know what they were saying, something in the universe, that if you do those things, you can ensure domestic tranquility. Now, in the street, we say, no justice, no peace.
Yeah.
But that's what the Constitution is saying. It's saying you want to ensure domestic tranquility, establish justice. Well, how do you establish justice? Where are the disparities? That's why Kamala and Biden must quickly, not in the first 100 days, but in the first 50 days, go at healing the body. Go at healing the body. Show the people that the people who are racist and the people are mean-spirited, they're the very ones that block your health care. They're the very ones that block your living wages. They're the ones that want to expose that, put a face on it. Show people, heal the body. That's the soul healing that we need. And if we do that, then we will see that. But if I'm gonna tell you, if in this moment they get power and then walk away and put off people's hopes for living wages and health care, we're gonna have to read Lorraine Hansberry's poem again. What happens to a dream deferred? See, people are still hopeful right now. They still believe in the possibility of marriage. That's why they voted. They still believe. They wouldn't be, you don't protest where you don't no longer have hope or believe this a nation has possibility. You just go somewhere and quit. So people still have a sense of belief. Now that they've seen a change in leadership, if they don't see the same commitment of good people to use power for good things, that they have seen mean people committed to do mean things, then you will end up where people will come to a place of despair and resentment, which will be a deeper sickness of the soul than the division between, McConnell and Pelosi. Heal the nation, address the issues of the body. And lastly, the politicians they gotta give the sixth man, the people, a chance to operate. And you don't do that if you get in the room and try to find out the least resistant bill you can pass. You use power to pass what's needed. And as Rebecca said, it takes time. Pass what's needed and then give the people a chance to move. Like in 65, that was after an election year, right? But the people changed the atmosphere, and folk, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Republicans and Democrats, who never thought they would vote on a Voting Rights Act, who never got elected to that, who were against it, they had to change their minds because the people changed the consciousness, and a bill was put forth that gave the people pushed for a bill to come forth, and then when the bill was put forth, the people had even more to push on. So this is a very serious time, and I'm going to preach, as I said, the necessary division. You cannot unify with hate and try to have love. You can't do that. That's a necessary division. You can't hook up with injustice and then try to bring justice. You can't have it that way. There's a certain level of creative tension, division, if you will, that has to exist in a democracy, in a world. And some people will come along after the fact. But I like what William Lloyd Garrison said, and I close here. William Lloyd Garrison was an abolitionist. And some people, white people told him, said, you need to stay away from all this abolition movement and so forth, and be moderate. And William Lloyd Garrison said, go tell a woman whose child is inside a house burning to be moderate. But don't you ever tell me to be moderate when it comes to the issue of abolition. He said, because I will be heard and this will be addressed. I'm paraphrasing. But he would not allow folk to suggest that he should choose moderation and some form of unity with the adversary over doing what was right to move the country and the community forward.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you for those words. Hey, Maddie, are there questions from the audience?
There sure are.
Yeah.
So from John on Facebook, how do we reverse the damage of the last 4 years?
I'll take a shot, Joan. I think that, and I'm going to say this to the question, that we first have to own that the damage is not just 4 years old. I think that is so critical in this moment, because we actually give Trump too much power if we keep referring to this as being the era of Trump. First of all, I, as a person of faith, I don't give eras to anybody. Only God can create an era for me. I just don't give human beings that kind of power that they can create a whole era. Now, Trump has done some things and McConnell in the courts. We've got to repeal that tax law that they did. We've got to stop them from undermining affordable care and then move to even more health care. And if the Supreme Court does it, the Congress is going to have to act. And we're going to have to be engaged and fight for it, not just walk away now that the election is over. And we're going to have to put a face on this pain. One of the things that progressives have been good at is numbers sometime and not face. And that's why in the Poor People's Campaign, we put a face on it. I often said that on the healthcare battle, that when the Affordable Care Act was passed, they should have come to the South and had big gatherings of white and Black people who were benefiting from it, so that it couldn't be framed as quote unquote something just for Black folk, or it couldn't be racialized, if you will. We have to have, in the midst of COVID, we've got to fight for paid sick leave and a living wage. And I'm not talking about $15 5 years from now, that'll be obsolete. So we have to have a public policy battle. On day one, week one, the new president is going to have to undo a whole lot of executive orders. Just undo them, just do it. And we're going to have a 50-day, normally in normal times you have a first 100 days. It's almost going to be a first 50 days because we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And by the way, we should stop and just remember all of the folk that are dying even today. We're going to have some kind of public ritual to address all these folk dying. You can't have 400,000 people dying, and Eddie Glaude and I were talking today, and there not be some national public ritual to remember them. We're going to have to address this selfishness, the politics of greed, right? Where people say, well, I would help them, but what is it going to do for me? And I think that this is going to be a time where there has to be great engagement. There has to be consistent engagement. But it's not just 4 years. Neil Painter says Trump is the iconography of a too often repeated American reality. And so I think that we have to not just give him all credit. He's done some tremendous things, but even with him being it moved, you've already seen just a moment ago, Lindsey Graham came out saying, I'm going to keep appointing confirming Trump judges all the way through 2021. I mean, the arrogance of that. And so we have to know that this is a long-term fight. I love what Rebecca said. And I want to say that our attitude must be what Frederick Douglass's attitude was in 1857 after the passage of the Dred Scott decision, when they said that it was over. And Frederick Douglass said the Supreme Court is against us, the magistrates are against us, the pen and the purse is against us, the state is against us, the federal government is against us. He said, but that's one view. And then he talked about other things. And then he said, I accept this challenge with a cheerful spirit, because these events may be the necessary links in the chain, the links in the chain necessary to the downfall of the entire system. Therefore, what I do know is that every attempt to stop the abolition movement has only served to intensify and embolden our agitation. If we stood in lines to vote, our agitation, our intensification of our call for the fundamental establishment of justice in this country must increase in the days to come, not decrease.
Right.
We cannot leave the politicians to themselves. We just cannot do this, not now.
Rebecca, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Oh, there's so many things to say, both about unity and about repair. Where I'm excited that Biden's talking about rejoining the Paris Climate Treaty, which we withdrew from officially on Wednesday, something Trump committed to even in his 2016 campaign. I'm excited that Kamala Harris talked about ending fracking, that Biden is sort of all but in name behind a Green New Deal. And, and these things are some of this is going back and fixing what Trump damaged. Some of it is doing the work that we've been prevented from doing. And, 2 years ago, climate scientists and the UNFCCC said that we had 10 years to do what we needed to do to leave the age of fossil fuels behind. And we've wasted a lot of time having a climate denial, fossil fuel industry representing president, with all the attendant environmental racism and injustice that goes with that. And so we need to do that work. And I just wanted to say something about unity, which is I noticed that Democrats are always supposed to find unity with Republicans. Nobody was yelling at Mitch McConnell that he needed to find unity with progressives. And in the same way that Black people are always being told to kind of not ruffle the feathers of white people, which makes them sound like ducks and geese or us. But, and we don't tell, we're not always yelling at conservatives that like, you need to only do things that make Black people comfortable. So there's this weird one-sidedness. I often think of it as being like a marriage, that everybody to the left of center is like the wife who's supposed to make her abusive, scary husband feel comfortable and soothe him and placate him. And, I'm a feminist. I'm not for placating and soothing abusers. I'm for like taking the power to not have to and to stop the abuse. So I think unity doesn't mean that we have to move towards them. It may mean that they need to move towards us. But something also to just keep being a feminist, I want to say, it's been coming up the last couple of days, is it came up for me in a big way with Me Too and the recent feminist stuff. People would ask the question, how do we keep these very powerful men from being so abusive? And I was like, I don't think we're going to stop them from being so abusive. So let's stop them from being so powerful.
That's right.
People like Harvey Weinstein need to not have power over other people's lives. And I think that we're in the midst of a profound power shift. What Republicans have been doing since the Southern strategy is stoking the fires of white grievance as a political tactic. And at a certain point, it became clear that the future is not white. This country will have a non-white majority in 24 years. The young electorate is already close to 50% non-white. The Republicans have picked a strategy that can only win through massive suppression of voters of color. And we've seen that in action. And so I think that unity will come when those people who want to deny others rights and equality don't have so much power and join us. One of the most exciting and encouraging things I heard in recent months was a radio show about where California was 25 years ago. In the mid-1990s, we had an anti-immigration, racist, anti-affirmative action governor, and a lot of politics, Prop 187, anti-affirmative action legislation, which unfortunately we didn't overturn in the recent election, et cetera. And we had all these angry white people. And then California politics continued to grow and evolve. And we are a non-white majority state. We are an all Democratic state. We will probably never elect another Republican senator or statewide politician. That era is over. And the people who, when they were riding high, were so intolerant, just had to get in line with the rest of us. And I think that's also what's going to happen in this country. We have this beautiful younger generation. We have a non-white future in this country. We have the gradual success of progressive politics just because more and more people accept those things, and they're going to have to join us. And that's where unity is going to be found. We don't need to sell out. We don't need to placate. We don't need, when somebody's a Nazi, you don't find common ground with them. When somebody's a Klansman, the truth isn't halfway between, the civil rights movement and the KKK. So we don't have to do that. We have to keep building. We have to be kind. We have to be loving. We have to be generous. But we have to stand our ground and build strength and know that we already are the majority and we're growing. We're growing in power. We're growing in numbers.
And Jane, can I say one thing? The book, I wrote a piece called We Are Called to Be a Movement. And what it was an analysis of this great text in the Bible that says, the stone that the builder rejected has now become the chief cornerstone. And it said that there are these times, and then it says that this is the day the Lord has made. The rejected people, whether they're rejected because of poverty, rejected because of racism, rejected because of sexism, rejected, their sexuality or their gender, now actually hold the key to this new majority. Like, it may be majority black in 24 years, but there is a majority right now, as Rebecca just said. And one of it is among the poor. Right now, we don't do another thing. There's 64 million poor and low wealth people in this country. 29 million of them voted the last election. We're pulling the data now because we targeted 2.3 million in 10 states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. And we know that 20% of them voted early who did not vote. These were least infrequent voters. But the point is, in 15 states right now, if just 1 to 19% of poor and low wealth people were to vote, they could fundamentally shift the margin of victory from 2016. And that's why you saw 3 black men able to run in the South for the Senate, and 2 of them got very, very close. This is this possibility. And we don't even know what would have happened without the suppression that has legitimately gone on or illegally gone on. I mean, not what Trump is talking about, but real suppression that we fight. There's 64 million poor and low wealth people now make up 1/30 of the electorate, 1/30. And there's another stat that we don't often hear. Poor and low wealth people tend to vote progressive. If they're under 50,000, they don't vote for the Trump type stuff. Now, we often blame them, and that's a liberal arrogance that we got to get away from. It's just a bunch of white and poor people. The actual truth is they voted 10% higher for Hillary, under 50,000, 10% higher. It's the volume, right? It's the volume. The other truth is, since the Southern strategy, Democrats basically walked away from the South. The South is not red, it's unorganized and low voting. So we have to decide who we are. Like as Rebecca said, it's not so, the unity I want to see is when we finally unify with ourselves. Because if the remnant, if the rejected stones unify, if we do the hard work in these southern states and the Southwest, that's an illusion. I think it was Jonathan Shell's book in 76 talked about the illusion of the Southern strategy, where actually you create voter suppression so that the state is a low voting state, and then you use division, as Dr. King said, to keep people who should be working together from each other, and you put a lot of grotesque pornographic sums of money to do the division. Well, if we recognize that and see what's going on and understand that right now, not 20 years from now, and North Carolina, what you saw in North Carolina and Georgia is a sign that the Texas is a sign. These are signs right in front of us that deep organizing around a moral agenda, dealing with poverty and racism and ecological devastation and war economy, challenging this false moral narrative, religious nationalism and white evangelicalism, actually can produce majorities in the next election, because we are seeing those majorities in this election. So it's not something that's just hypothesis. It's not Rebecca and I just being all grandiose and philosophical. No, the numbers are here. And the unity we need to be unifying is unifying and recognizing you can't be for facing ecological devastation and not at the same time be against racist voter suppression. Because the people who benefit from racist voter suppression vote for the corporations and not for the people. The people who benefit from racist voter suppression block living wages and healthcare. So in the Poor People's Campaign, we're saying we have to have a fusion. It's not that our movements don't need to have silos. Silos are important, but we also have to have a place to come together, and we have to go to the places, not just try to create blue walls. That may be important for a victory in a moment, but blue wall is not going to sustain victory. We need to transform the country, and the numbers are there. 1/30 of this voting population is now poor and low wealth. If we speak to the people, and there are 3 reasons I'm including, we did a study called Voting is Power Unleashed, Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low Wealth Vote. The first reason that poor and low wealth people said they didn't vote was nobody says our name. It wasn't voter suppression. Voter suppression was one of the reasons. Transportation and not being able to get off work was the second reason. But the empirical data of the study, in places I've gone to, from the hood to the holler, Eastern Kentucky, we've been there, been in the hood of Louisville, Alabama, Appalachia, nobody says our name. Now, Biden and Kamala got closer than in every recent years. he came, came to the Poor People's Gathering. We had 1.7 million people online. He talked about ending poverty was one of his theories of change. Fight for 15 is a part of an anti-poverty program. It's not all that we want. But if you can win just doing Fight for 15 and expanding healthcare, imagine what your vote totals could be if you actually say to that 64 million people, we're really going to do the kind of policy shifts that get at the issue of poverty and healthcare for all. I'm telling you, the numbers are here. The rejected stones now hold the power to become the chief cornerstone of an entire new architecture in American political life.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you. I said at the start that Reverend Barber and Rebecca Solnit were who we wanted to be guests today, but I also knew that I needed to have Joan Baez sing today. Her presence, her voice has been at the forefront of movements for 6 decades, bringing hope and inspiration to the world, from bomb shelters in North Vietnam and the front lines of the civil rights movement to the fields of the Central Valley alongside Cesar Chavez. And young ones out there, you also should know that she discovered Bob Dylan. I'm so moved that she said yes. And so now let's welcome the one and only Joan Baez.
Fire Drill Friday. Jane Fonda, old buddy, thank you so much for inviting me. I've heard all good things about your movement / celebration. I've always believed that action is the antidote to despair. I also believe that creativity, kindness, empathy, compassion, the arts, music, all good things are the antidote to evil. And this world has had more than its share of evil in the last few years. I also believe in little victories and big defeats. That means those defeats are wound up in that evil, and it's wiser to accept that they're there so that when your little victory path runs into them, you won't get so discouraged. In the end, I do believe that kindness and decency have a chance of winning out, and it depends on us. So I would say keep your eyes on the prize, wear your heart on your sleeve, and don't let the bastards get you down. And I'll sing you a song I've sung for decades, and I sang it for Reverend Barber at his virtual birthday party. And it goes like this. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no hypocrisy turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no hypocrisy turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no wickedness turn me around, no, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no wickedness turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, no, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, keep on singing, keep on swinging, gonna build a brand new world.
Dr. Barber and Rebecca Solnit for joining us, and thanks to all of you for continuing to be part of Fire Drill Fridays. The work is going to start now for this new post-election phase, and we need to stay together, strengthen numbers. And it's especially important, it's strategic even, to celebrate our achievement. We turned out in record numbers despite everything they tried to put in our way, and we'll see the will of the voters prevail. On November 7th, that's tomorrow, we're coming together to celebrate what we already won together, honor those we have lost, and make very clear that Trump has no power here. The power lies with the people. So join us all over the country tomorrow to affirm the core values of our democracy, that every vote counts and that voters decided. You got to go and visit bit.ly/protect the results. You can find online and offline events closest to you. And once again, thanks to the Reverend Rebecca and to Joan Baez, and thanks to all of you. Don't forget to wear your mask, stay safe, love each other, and I'll see you next week.